May 7, 1945. A sprawling German manor outside Frankfurt served as supreme headquarters for Allied operations. Inside its ornate walls, General George S. Patton sat opposite Supreme Commander Dwight D. Eisenhower. The swastika banners had been struck down hours earlier. Germany's surrender lay on the table. Outside, American GIs whooped and cheered in the streets. But Patton, ever the warrior, felt no joy. "We're going to have to fight them sooner or later," he told Eisenhower in a low voice. "Better to strike now, while our forces are fresh and at full strength." Not the Wehrmacht, but the Red Army, America's newly minted ally. Eisenhower looked at him, astonished. For 3 years, he had painstakingly nurtured cooperation with Stalin's forces to destroy Hitler. The American press hailed Uncle Joe as a liberator, and here was Patton urging an immediate assault on the Soviet Union. "George, you just don't get politics," Eisenhower replied. "This war is done. We're heading home." Patton saw it then. Eisenhower knew Patton was right, but he wouldn't act. That pregnant silence became one of the most fateful pauses in U.S. military history. Patton had spotted the Soviet danger months before Washington would admit it existed. He sketched out a plan to strike while the Red Army was depleted and American power peaked, and was brushed aside by commanders far more concerned with public opinion than hard realities. Patton's Third Army had pierced deeper into Nazi Germany than any other Allied unit. Shermans and Pershings rolled unopposed through Czechoslovakia. In every town he liberated, Patton's men witnessed Soviet troops imposing a reign of terror. Mass rape, looting, summary executions of anyone deemed anti-communist, entire families deported to gulags. Patton's intelligence officers brought back horrors so horrific that even battle-hardened veterans recoiled. In April 1945, Patton wrote to his wife, Beatrice, "I want to know exactly how much lead it takes to stop those Russians. They strike me as a future menace in world affairs." While diplomats clung to the hope that Stalin would honor promises of free elections, Patton saw a conquering empire pushing westward. He heard from newly freed American POWs who had fallen into Soviet hands. They spoke of beatings, theft of shoes and watches, starvation rations, officers executed for protesting. He learned that Soviet units were dismantling entire factories, shipping machinery back to Moscow, then installing communist regimes in Poland, Romania, Hungary, and Bulgaria. Anti-Nazi partisans who had fought shoulder to shoulder with the Red Army were hunted down and vanished. By May, Patton had drafted a precise campaign plan. This was no rant. It was a reasoned strategy built on hard data. The Red Army had sacrificed 27 million lives to crush the Nazis. Their lines were stretched thin from Berlin back to Russia. Their supply chains snapped and snarled. American troops, by contrast, maintained air supremacy, secure logistics, and fresh equipment. To take on the Russians now, Patton told Under-Secretary of War Robert Patterson in mid-May, would take 6 weeks, tops. Their anti-aircraft artillery is weak. They can't bomb us back. Our planes could devastate their rail yards and supply depots. Mechanically, their tanks, once formidable, are worn out. Our Shermans may lack armor, but they run, and we've got them by the thousands. And their soldiers, once they realize they're not liberating anyone, morale will crumble. Patton even suggested recruiting former Wehrmacht men, hundreds of thousands of German veterans who loathed the Soviets even more than they did Americans. "I'd rather have a German division at my side than a Russian one," he wrote in a memo that leaked to the press. The uproar was immediate. Eisenhower's publicly offered reasons were logistical. The U.S. Army was set up to occupy Western Germany, not press into Poland. Congress wanted demobilization. American families yearned for their boys to come home. Beneath all that lay political truth. President Truman would not break with Roosevelt's détente towards Stalin. The Potsdam Agreements dictated spheres of influence. Any plan to attack the Red Army would brand Eisenhower a warmonger, destroying his reputation as the victor in Europe and a future presidential hopeful. Eisenhower genuinely believed in diplomacy, in institutions like the United Nations, to keep peace. Patton thought like a soldier, Eisenhower like a statesman. George sees every problem as if it's a battle waiting to be fought, Eisenhower confided to his chief of staff. He forgets we have to live next door to these people. Patton was not the only one sounding the alarm. Winston Churchill, recalling Bolshevik Russia's past betrayals, had urged Western forces to push as far east as possible. In mid-May, Churchill sent Truman a plan, Operation Unthinkable, to drive the Soviets from Eastern Europe, even suggesting former German troops fight alongside British and American divisions. The chiefs of staff concluded it was militarily viable if launched immediately. Truman rejected it outright. When Patton learned of Churchill's proposal, he felt vindicated. At least one person in power grasps the danger we face, he told his aides. But Washington's mood had shifted. Headlines accused Patton of sympathizing with Nazis, questioned his sanity, mocked his bellicosity. There was no reporting on Soviet atrocities. The narrative painted Patton as a hero, unfit for peace. By late August, Eisenhower was under pressure to sideline Patton. An offhand remark about denazification, that expelling every former party member was idiotic, became the pretext. Newspapers portrayed Patton as minimizing Hitler's crimes. On September 28, 1945, Eisenhower relieved him of Third Army Command. Everyone knew why. Patton wouldn't stop warning about Russia. In the following weeks, Patton kept firing off letters to the War Department, pleading for a show of force. "Keep our boots polished, bayonets sharp, and show the Reds we mean business," he wrote. "If we disarm the Germans and leave the Soviets unchecked, we win this war only to lose the next." In early December, he again laid out his assessment to Undersecretary Patterson. Communism would cement itself in Eastern Europe, then spread westward. Conflict with Moscow was inevitable. "We'll regret not acting in 1945, he warned. "In 5, 10, or 20 years, we'll wish we'd struck while the iron was hot." 3 days later, on December 9, 1945, a staff car carrying Patton collided with a truck near Mannheim. He suffered a spinal injury that left him paralyzed. On December 21st, he died, aged 60. Rumors of assassination swirled, but nothing was ever proved. A tragic accident had silenced the one general willing to speak the unwelcome truth. History unfolded exactly as Patton had predicted. By 1946, Soviet forces had consolidated their grip over Poland, East Germany, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria. Promises of democratic elections evaporated. Resistance leaders were arrested, executed, or sent to labor camps. In 1948, Czechoslovakia fell in a communist coup. Between 1945 and 1989, Eastern European regimes killed or imprisoned millions. The Iron Curtain Churchill warned about clanged shut. The Cold War, fought to contain the Soviet threat Patton had seen in May 1945, lasted 45 years, cost trillions, and claimed millions of lives in proxy wars. In 1949, the USSR tested its first atomic bomb. By 1950, America was fighting in Korea. Patton's window of opportunity closed forever. Every major outcome Patton forecast came to pass. Soviet domination of Eastern Europe, communist expansion worldwide. A decades-long standoff that might have been avoided or shortened. His plan's feasibility remains debated. Certainly, political realities of 1945 made it impossible. But he saw before most that a moment existed when Soviet weakness and American strength intersected. After his death, voices across the spectrum invoked Patton's name. George Kennan's long telegram echoed Patton's warnings about Moscow's designs. The Truman Doctrine committed America to containment, accepting Soviet control of Eastern Europe as a fait accompli. Conservatives lauded Patton as a prophet, silenced by appeasers. General Douglas MacArthur lamented that a warrior's counsel had been ignored. Ronald Reagan, campaigning in 1980, celebrated Patton's belief in strength over accommodation. When the Berlin Wall fell and the Soviet Union collapsed, many felt that Patton's 1945 intuition had been vindicated. Patton's story raises timeless questions. Should military leaders press political leaders to confront threats early and decisively, or must statesmen weigh public sentiment and institutions above strategic opportunity? After 9/11, and now with China's rise, we ask again, do we act preemptively or do we negotiate and hope for the best? Patton's answer was simple. Strike when the enemy is weak and show force if you wish to be respected. In the end, George S. Patton was buried among his Third Army soldiers at the Luxembourg American Cemetery, in accordance with his wish. He left behind a legacy of decisive action and unyielding clarity about the world's dangers. Whether or not one agrees that the US should have attacked the Soviet Union in May 1945, Patton's prescience and the cost of ignoring him remain instructive. If you'd like more stories like this, please like and subscribe.